It says,
We're live.
hello, we are live. So today is the second of our Life Unleashed series, which is our sister series to Work Reimagined. And in this series, we focus on letting go of societal expectations and designing the life that you want. I want to welcome everybody who's here. If you will please go to the comment section of the YouTube and introduce yourself. So tell us who you are, where you're from, and your favorite place, because we are talking about what it means to be a destination of choice and make home a destination of choice. So we want to hear about your favorite place today. So here at the Pioneers, we ascribe to the slow fi philosophy, which means that we're building and using financial freedom to design a life that we truly love. And our goal is to help you do the same. So let me share a little bit more context about the Life Unleashed series as you're introducing yourself. Okay, so if you haven't yet, go to the comment section and introduce yourself to us. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and your favorite place. So many people, when they first learn about financial independence or personal finance, think about it with an all or nothing mindset. So I'm either like set financially and never need to work again. And if not, then I need to work long hours and grind it out at a job that I don't really like, right? It's like one or the other. And so we're here to say that there's a lot of gray area in the middle. And if you're here, the likelihood is that you have more options than you think, whether you're paying off debt, have a solid emergency savings or FU fund, or if you've reached Coast Fi or beyond, you have a lot of options that you can grab a hold of along the path to Fi. I see Ryan joining us from Los Angeles. And Tucson, I think, is what he's saying is one of his favorite places. So that's awesome. We have not made it to Tucson yet, so that needs to go on the list for us. So when we realize that we have options, it can be scary and overwhelming. And it can bring up a lot of questions, right? About what options are actually available to me right now. If I do have options, like now, what do I do? How do I actually figure out what it is? How do I claw back time and energy to do the work to actually figure out what I want? Or perhaps you have ideas and wonder, how do I actually take action? Or what if I make a change and the grass isn't greener? Okay, so those are all examples of things that we will be talking about in this content series and some of the things that we'll be talking about today. Okay, I see Daniel from Tampa. Favorite place is Lithia, Florida. I don't know where that is, but we'll have to look that up.
I was just looking it up too, actually.
Yeah, where is it?
I'm zooming out to find out. That's near Tampa, it looks like.
Near Tampa. Okay, awesome. Daniel, maybe you can let us know, what do you like about Lithia, Florida? And same, Ryan, for you. Tell us like what specifically you like about Tucson. And then I see we have Nancy here. So Nancy says Northern Canada. I'm curious, are you from Northern Canada, or is Northern Canada your favorite place? And let us know why. I'm particularly excited about this conversation that we're about to have today, because Corey and I have a huge life change coming up. We've lived in Boston for the last 10 years, and we recently decided to sell our condo here and move to northern New Hampshire in the White Mountains. So we're excited to share more with you about that. But before we do that, let me welcome Lance from Indiana. And he says his favorite place is a Pioneer stream. Love that, Lance. I don't think that that's true, but I would still love to hear where's your favorite place. So So Corey, maybe you can tell people who you are, where you're from, and what your favorite place is, while other folks are introducing themselves in the chat.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Corey. I'm the other half of the Pioneers. Currently living in Boston. In 2 weeks, I'll be able to say I'm from northern New Hampshire. And my favorite place, it's funny, I knew this question was coming, but I think my favorite place that I've ever been to is the Galapagos Islands, just because it's so remote. I spent actually 2 summers there in Ecuador and visited the Galapagos Islands both times. And it's just absolutely beautiful, perfect weather, lots of wildlife. So I think that's why I love the Galapagos.
Awesome. So for me, so for those of you who don't know, I'm Jess. I am the other half of the Pioneers that isn't Corey. Currently live in Boston, though in 2 weeks we will be in northern New Hampshire, as he said. And for me, the favorite place is really hard because I love to travel and I love to go to different places. But my favorite places from the last year, I'll say, have been like all of southern Utah and Crested Butte, Colorado. So just incredible natural beauty and a lot of really good ability for hiking. So awesome. So we're going to dive in here and we're excited to share more about why we decided to leave Boston, why we decided on New Hampshire, of all places, how we came up with the criteria of what we were interested in, what we wanted in our home as a destination. And to share more about how we're thinking about this and if this is our forever home, and what our camper van travel will continue to look like. So before jumping in, just want to share a couple of things. So one, if you haven't yet, please introduce yourself in the comments. So tell us who you are, where you're from, and a favorite place that you have. And if you have any questions for us throughout the conversation, please put those into the chat. We collected a bunch of questions through email and Instagram, so we'll be pulling those up on the screen and asking those. But if there are things that come up as we're going, please add those to the chat, and we'll try to answer those as well. And then the last thing that I want to say is at the end, I will be asking anyone who is here to tell us what they learned from this conversation and if there's any action that you'll take as a result. So I'm going to ask this of you because I know we listen differently to these conversations when we're either passively consuming versus whether we're expecting to take an action coming out of it. So I will ask you that, and then I encourage you to stick around for the end because as a thank you to everyone who's joining us live, we're going to share a special thank you specifically for you all. Okay, so diving in, the first question that we got was what actually sparked this idea of moving? And I don't know if Corey, you want to jump in on this one, and then I can fill in some gaps.
Yeah, it's such a fun question because there were so many things that got us thinking about moving, and really what sparked the idea. I think part of it was me leaving my job about a year ago, actually, almost to the day, and us becoming officially location independent. So we weren't really tied to one location. And so we were traveling around in the camper van. I think we spent almost 6 months in the van last year. But we also loved having a home base too. And so being location independent, it was much easier for us to even consider the idea of moving. But I think what sparked it was actually being at the Slow-Fi, at least for me. I'd love to hear if this is different for you, Jess. But what sparked it was being at the Slow-Fi retreat last fall in Colorado. And a couple of the attendees were talking about making their home a destination of choice, I think is the phrase. And it really just got me and both of us thinking, like, what would it look like if our home was where we wanted to be most of the time or all the time? I'm not sure exactly, but it really just sparked the idea of like, I don't think Boston is actually our destination of choice anymore. And so that really opened it up to say, wow, like as I stop and think about it, Boston has been great, but we are ready and starting to think about, where would we want to be next? And so I think that's what sparked it initially. What would you add to that?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I do think that I started thinking about this a little bit earlier than you did. And so it was more like when we got back from that first long van trip. So when we were back in the summer, so July and August for me, that I just kept having these thoughts of like, oh, Boston is the worst. Like the traffic, we'd be like driving and stuck in traffic. And then I would just have this voice that was like, Boston's the worst. Or like it would be super hot and humid. Like it was like 95 degrees with like 95% humidity last summer. And like in the middle of the city is like, that's brutal. And I just remember being like, oh, this is the worst. And realized like, I don't think I want to live in a place where I consistently am thinking like, oh, this is the worst. Right. That like, that was a sign to me that like it was time to start to consider what different could look like. Though I know like we talked about it a little bit and we're like, oh, do we want to start over, like meet all new friends, right? All of that. But I feel like it started there for me, but then similarly at the Slow-Fi retreat, it was actually Heidi Dusek, so one of the speakers. She's from Ordinary Sherpa, the podcast, and she's been traveling around the country and took a gap year with her family of 5. And she shared this idea of like her goal was to figure out how to make home a destination of choice, and that I think really sparked something for both of us. And then I had also been seeing some like Instagram, like outdoor, like influencers who, had been traveling around and everything and then decided to like move to their ideal location. And they were saying things like, I don't even want to travel anywhere in the summer because like I love Tahoe so much. And for me, that was interesting to think like, where would that place be for me? And so, yeah, it sort of evolved from there. Um, so
The
that
summer,
sparked,
yeah, the
yeah.
summer in Boston was pretty hot and miserable. I definitely remember that, and starting to feel like, wow, maybe we don't want to be here in the summer.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and then we started planning a trip for this coming year where we wouldn't be in Boston for the summer, which is great. We wanted to chase around the 65 to 75 degree weather around the country for over the summer. Um,
And it sounds like Daniel has very similar values too, because Daniel said that Lithia, Florida has a lot of parks, trails, freshwater springs, a lot of outdoor activities. So
mhm,
definitely can appreciate that, Daniel.
mhm. Yeah. So one of the next questions that we got was, how did you actually create the criteria for what you wanted, and for where we actually wanted to move? So this is an interesting one because in my mind, like there were a couple of key things, but it was really at this Slow-Fi retreat. We did a breakout group actually that Heidi facilitated, that helped me start to think through, okay, what are the must haves and what are the nice to haves, as we figure out what this would look like. And, just started dreaming. And for me, it was, I want to be somewhere where I can be outdoors, um, and that is like easily accessible to places that are really beautiful, with access to hiking, um, as well as Like we knew we didn't want to be so remote. Like we had spent time in early 2023 in southern Utah, and there were places where it was like it's like 2 hours to your closest like legit grocery store. And that was hard. And so we also knew we wanted to be like close enough to like amenities, right? So a grocery store, a hospital, pharmacy, that kind of thing, that we didn't feel like we had to travel really, really far to get there. What were some of the things that were on the list for you, Cor?
It's funny, I created a Google Doc when we first started talking and brainstorming. So I was just finding that and pulling that up. And I think this did get modified a little bit once we started working with a realtor, because they started to ask us like, what are your must-haves and what are your nice-to-haves? So we did modify it. I don't think we had that categorization initially. It was just kind of a list of a bulleted point, like a bullet list of these are the things we want. As you said, close to groceries, already mentioned. Out of a big city. So I think we wanted to be in a small city or rural near a small city. We wanted to have a garage if we were moving north and there was going to be a more severe winter, and or a space for the van because we want to keep the van. We also wanted some land. So we said multiple acres was something that was really interesting to us. But really just like a space with a lot of light and space where we could both work and play, right? And so play meaning both like space to play board games and have people over and host, as well as being able to create videos and do other things for the pioneers.
Yeah. And if I can jump in for context, right now in Boston, we live in a 2-bedroom condo that's 1,000 square feet, which is like pretty decent size for city living. But we have our bedroom, and then we have a second bedroom, which serves as like office, YouTube studio, spare bedroom. And then we have our like open concept living space, which is like kitchen, dining room, living room, plus my office and desk. So it's pretty tight in there. And when we would have visitors, we would be like, oh, well, we have calls. So you got to be like out of the spare bedroom at a certain time. And even since we've told people that we were moving, we've actually had multiple family members say like, oh, we're excited to come visit, but we didn't feel like we could when like you only had in one extra bedroom, right? Like we wouldn't be able to all fit. So we are excited to have more people be able to visit us at once.
And also the reason why I'm taking this call from the dining room table.
Yeah, because we do not have enough room to have 2 people in our sort of office YouTube space at the moment. So we're taking it from 2 separate rooms. Yeah.
And I think going back to the question, I think we created the list both like in talking together of like, hey, thinking through and brainstorming, but also talking to other people. I remember having a number of specific conversations with family and friends who we knew had moved to a specific location very intentionally so, and just ask them their thought process, their decision-making process, like how did they decide to live where they're living? And that was really helpful for us because it brought up a number of things that we didn't even consider. Like one of them was internet, like making sure that we have high-speed internet, from a friend that moved to Vermont, and that being really important. So.
Right. Yeah. And as we were traveling in the van too, we actually stopped and like stayed in people's driveways along the route, and got to connect with them. And it was really helpful to talk with people and see where they're living, why they chose to live there, and what were the reasons for that. And so, yeah, really appreciate all the folks that hosted us for that. So one thing that I actually want to do, I actually want to turn it to the chat. So we're talking a little bit more about this. I actually want to hear from you. Like, what would be on your list of criteria if you were going to make your home a destination of choice, right? Like, what would be your must-have criteria? Okay. And please answer this, and we'll talk a little bit more as you're doing that about why we specifically chose New Hampshire, right? So we have some of the criteria that we shared, but why we specifically chose to move to New Hampshire.
And
So
I'm
yeah.
really excited to see what the responses are. Like it's exciting for our move being so close with less than 2 weeks, but knowing that a number of you have joined this live, and a number of you are also probably watching this post live in the recorded video, just to think that you're so intentional about hearing about our story and then applying it to yours. I'm really excited to hear what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so definitely interested in that. So yeah, we'll check in on the chat in a second, but so why New Hampshire, right, over other places? So right, you might hear all of our criteria so far and be saying like, oh, well, that could be, New England, or that could be Colorado, or that could be Utah, or that could be the Pacific Northwest, right? Like there's a lot of different places that could meet that criteria. And for us, like for me at least, one of the criteria was like I wanted to be in a place that was like more climate friendly, in the sense that we weren't going to be dealing with natural disasters. Like there wasn't, like, in a place where there wasn't going to be a lot of forest fires that we were going to need to worry about, or worry about the smoke from forest fires, as well as to be in a place that has sufficient water. I know, like, that's not something that I think many people need to be that worried about at the moment, but say 20 years from now, a place like Arizona might be, struggling with its water supply. And so that was an important thing for us, and that it wasn't going to be too hot, right? And so we were hot. It was crazy hot in Boston last summer, and so we were excited to go further north, where it's just not quite as hot in the summer.
And I can just hear all of the viewers from the South laughing at us, saying that Boston was hot. I'm sure Daniel's thinking that in Florida, but yeah, I think it is that the neutral climate, like not many natural disasters, but it was also the proximity to our current social network and friend group. I think we knew there were a handful of locations across the country that we would consider, but there was a huge plus to being close to the friend group and the social network that we had already created in Boston.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And actually, when we were narrowing it down, we were honing in on like one area in like northern New Hampshire in the White Mountains, and then one area in Vermont in the Green Mountains. So like northern Vermont, northern central Vermont. And then, we were looking at houses and, those different places. And one of the things that we were excited, particularly about New Hampshire, was it's actually only about 2.5 hours from where we currently are in Boston. And so that's like not a crazy weekend trip to come back down and see friends, or for friends to come and see us. Whereas where we were looking in Vermont was about a 4-hour drive, which is just a much, much larger commitment, right? Like it takes a lot more planning ahead to say, making a 4-hour drive is worth it versus making a 2.5-hour drive. And so that also motivated us as well. So we have a couple folks who have shared some of their responses to what are their criteria. So Lance, we hear, is school, cost of living, taxes, and weather. We are child free. So we don't need to be, we don't need to consider schooling, which is fortunate for us. And then, it's interesting. Cost of living did factor in for us. I think we didn't make the decision specifically because we wanted to move to a place that was less expensive. But as we were thinking through it, it became clear to us that it would be a lot less expensive. And so it made it almost easier to make the decision or less risky, because if we moved, life would cost so much less. So that was definitely a consideration as well. And then I see from Rebecca, less seasonal allergy issues, safe for African Americans, ability to grow what we like, and possibly have small animals. Yeah, that's definitely a really important thing, to be in a place where you and your family feel comfortable and safe. Yeah, one thing for us that we were thinking about was living in a place like Boston that's so achievement oriented. Was really in some ways it was hard for us to find a lot of people that were sort of living life differently. And so that was one of the things that we're looking for in terms of the culture of a place, is that we do want it to be less achievement and work oriented. So that was important to us. And then I see Path Forward, who's in their favorite place. You'll have to tell us where it is, because I don't think that you told us yet. So drop that in the comments where your favorite place is. And they say the access to variety of outdoor activities, biking, hiking, camping, fly fishing, and both the mountains and the desert. Proximity to family, and a small mid-sized town. That sounds like a lot of the same criteria as us, though we don't have, I would say Southwest Colorado. I was going to guess Southwest Colorado or somewhere in Utah, or possibly Arizona or New Mexico, in that area if you're desert and mountains. Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, proximity to, being in with the people, and, being near a town, and access to all the different activities. So that's
we should have made you guess before Path Forward.
seriously, I know. Next time. For sure. Corey, is there anything that you would want to add on why we chose New Hampshire over other places?
I think the other thing is that we just happened to find the house that fit all, checked all the boxes and fit the requirements that we were looking for. When we started looking, we were looking pretty casually, just kind of looking at the market, thinking about it as a future change, not necessarily a change that we'd be making in the spring of this year. And so we saw a couple of houses that really interested us. And then the house that we're buying ended up just checking all of the boxes. And when we went to visit, it just felt like the place that we wanted to move to. So I think if it weren't for the house, I think there was still a possibility that Vermont was in play, because we were looking at both Vermont and New Hampshire. But it just was the house that really kind of made the final decision for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So for those of you who don't know, basically we went and we looked at this house, and it was more of an experiment in some ways. We were we're just casually looking, just seeing what's out there, seeing what's on the market. And there had been this house that was on the market for a few weeks. And I just remember I kept going back to it. And I kept looking at it, and we were we have these questions about it. And then I remember saying I think if we don't go see this house, I'm going to regret it. And so then we made a plan to go see it. Yeah. It was one of those things that was if we don't go, are we going to be asking ourselves what if? And so we made a plan and we drove up to visit, and we sort of walked away from that experience being like, I think if we don't try to get this house, we're just going to be looking for this house for the next year. Right. And we're going to be like disappointed by all of the other places that we see, because like this is actually what we want, even though we weren't really ready in some ways to move. Like I think we had said, ideal timing would be in the fall of this year, because we are, which we'll talk about a little bit more, we are actually leaving in late April to be on the road in our camper van for 4 months. And we are still doing that. And so we were sort of thinking we would move and figure all of this out after we got back. But then it all happened quickly. And we knew like, this is the house that we want. And, we wanted to make it happen now.
And that's probably a good takeaway, like for all of you who are watching and are considering making big changes. I think a good question to ask is, what would I regret more, right? Would I regret more the inaction or the action, like taking this leap? Sometimes changes are small, but sometimes they're big, like moving to another state. And this, as Jessica and I were saying, this is much earlier than we were expecting to actually move. And so that was a really helpful question for us as we were thinking through and making the decision.
Yeah, right. Like, would we regret not doing this? And so actually one of the questions that we got was, how did you experiment to know that it was the right choice? Like we've talked a little bit about how we went and like visited some of the communities, and we've spent a little bit, some time up in Vermont and New Hampshire just on vacations that we've been on. But even when we went and visited the house, right? Like in some ways that was an experiment. And we went to a local restaurant, and like part of the experiment was like, let's look around and see, are there other people our age at this local restaurant? How popular is it? Like, what types of activities do they have? And I remember we looked around and we were like, wow, this place is packed. There's tons of people our age, and it's actually way more diverse than we thought. And so for us, like that, it's funny because an experiment can be something that small. As well, is just go to the restaurant and look around and see.
And then on top of that, so there's a little bit of context. We were entertaining a few different iterations for our future home. One option was also exploring tiny houses. So I've always been fascinated with tiny homes, and so we were entertaining that for a little bit. We didn't want like ultra tiny home, but we're entertaining something that was smaller, just being really intentional with the space. And then Jess, I don't know if you want to share, you actually visited like an Airbnb.
Yeah. So I rented an Airbnb to do a writing retreat in December, and I was like, ooh, this will be a good experiment. And I rented a tiny house. And it was like 400 square feet, and it was great. It was perfect for a 1-person writing retreat. But it was tiny. I like didn't have enough room to do yoga anywhere, or like full on stretching. And like I was, brought the desk, and I was working on my writing in the middle of the living room. And I just remember being like, I don't think I could live like this for long periods of time. Like it was great for a weekend for me by myself. Right. But like with the two of us, we would be like on top of each other. And so, yeah, so it was like, I came back from that being like, okay, I'm thinking, no, not the tiny house. Let's get a regular size house for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So one question that we got is this our forever home? And I actually think this question goes along really well with the experimentation question, because from my perspective, I'm thinking like we're not putting the pressure, like we didn't put the pressure on this decision that it needed to be our forever home. Right. And so, in my mind, it's like I was in a space of saying like, if I was trying to find my forever home and if I needed to be confident before we moved that this was going to be my forever home, like it could have taken me like 3 to 5 years of still living in a place I didn't want, of like still living in Boston, a place that I didn't want to be anymore, to like get to this place where I was like 100% confident. And then I realized like I don't even know if living in Boston, I would even be able to build that confidence, even from just visiting. And so for me, thinking about it as this is a really good choice and like meets our criteria and allows us to get closer, right, to what destination of choice means to us. And that I feel really good about this decision for at least the next 3 to 5 years. And it's a good like launching point. It's a good home base to continue the exploration. That I think gave me a lot more confidence to say like, yeah, this is a really good decision. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. It's more of a maybe, right? To put it really simply, it's more of like this could be our forever home. It certainly has potential based on what we know about ourselves right now, but there's also no pressure to commit to that for the rest of our lives, knowing that things could change in the future. Not that I always want to be moving, because moving is I'm already learning, a very stressful process, but I do think there's a lot less pressure to approach moving and just life in general with this experimentation approach, and not put pressure to get it right the first time.
Yeah. And, I think one thing that helped with this, like helped with the decision to say, like, if this is a 3 to 5 year decision, like that's okay. And we feel good about that, is that we're moving to a much lower cost of living area. And we'll actually be mortgage free because of the equity that we have in our condo that we're selling. And because of that, it was almost like, well, even if, in 3 to 5 years, worst case scenario, like we decide we want to move elsewhere and we're like paying, realtor fees and whatever again, like we're still in a better situation financially than we would be had we stayed in Boston. Right. And so I would say that wasn't the driving choice. But I think like one thing that always goes through my mind when I'm like, oh, well, let me think through all the pitfalls, right? Finances are always one of those things to think through. And so as we got to that one, it felt like, we were able to set that aside and be like, no, this would actually be a good financial decision for us. This isn't the reason why we're doing it. But it was like confirming to say, like, there really is not a lot of risk. There's not a lot of risk to this choice. And so it made it, easier to make and easier to approach it as this is a next step and we're going to continue our experimentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question that we got was, what are we doing with the camper van? Will we continue to travel in the camper van?
Well, we already kind of answered this,
We
but
did.
yes, spoiler alert, we are continuing to travel in our camper van. Right now, we're planning, I think, about a 4-month trip next spring and summer, and going to be traveling out west. So really excited for that.
Next spring and summer, or this spring and summer?
This spring, the next one that we experienced. Yep.
This coming spring and summer.
As in
Yeah,
like
we'll be
5 weeks from now.
life is crazy. Um, Yeah, it's wild. But one thing too that we'll mention is we are planning to sort of stay in place a little bit after we get back from that trip. So we're going to come home. We're planning on being in New Hampshire and New England for the fall, the winter, and the spring of next year, at least, because we want to like get to know the house and make sure that we know all of the like potential pitfalls for when there gets to be tons of snow and sub-zero temperatures and, all of those important things that we like know how to take care of it, and if like what would be needed to make it okay for us to travel away. And then we'll probably do a little bit of, sort of shorter travel, maybe a month in 2025. But, really, you know, appreciate the location, because we are there because we want to be there. And one thing I'm really excited about is I would love to hike the 48 4,000 footers in New Hampshire. I think that's going to be, a long, many year endeavor. So we need to be in New Hampshire to do that.
So speaking of winter and snow, Tom actually mentioned his destination of choice would be able to snowbird once they're empty nesters to chase ideal temperatures. I think there's a part of me, Tom, that agrees with you, although I am excited to experiment with a little bit more severe winter and more snow up in northern New Hampshire. So I will keep you updated after we experience the first winter next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people say that they like really embrace the winter sports. So I'm interested to like try out Nordic or cross country skiing and snowshoeing. And we will have this like super cozy wood stove to keep the house nice and warm. So we'll see how we feel about winter and if we do want to snowbird after our first couple winters up there.
And Lance asked if we asked our dog what she thought about the snow and sub-zero temperatures. We did not ask her, although she does love the snow, so I'm sure she will be very happy about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Well, so I would love to hear from you. If there's any questions that you have for us, or what did you learn from this conversation today? Do you want to make home a destination of choice? What could that look like for you? Are there any, is there any steps that you want to take to start exploring what this could look like? While people are doing that, I'll pull up. So Lance asked, did we have any deal breakers? I'm not exactly quite sure what he means by deal breakers.
I think at least what I'm interpreting is, were there any things that would prevent us from moving there or something? That's how I'm reading it, but let us know, Lance, if I'm misinterpreting that. Yeah.
Things that would cause us not to move there. I mean, so one thing that I will say is that we did look at a house in a different area of Vermont than we decided like, oh, we would want to be in this other sort of northern area with more access to outdoor activities and more younger people. And part of the reason why we decided no on that was it actually was in a community that was like a lot older and more rural. Most of the people were working in agriculture, and it was really nice for a realtor to say like, I don't think what I know about you, like that you would be happy here. It seems like you want to be in a place that has, more access to younger people and access directly to outdoor activities. And so I think that was a deal breaker, right? And so if we had looked around when we were sitting at that restaurant and there was all people in their 50s and 60s, I think that might have been a deal breaker for us.
And I think if it wasn't as close to stores and amenities and hospital and health facilities, I think that also would have been a deal breaker for us too.
Yeah. So if we would need to drive more than like 15, 20 minutes to get to a real grocery store, we would have definitely been wondering if that was the right place.
Yeah.
For sure. Awesome. Well, Core, what did you learn from this conversation today?
I think I was reminded just how important the experimentation approach is. Like, even though that is a big part of our approach, like just talking through it was a really good reminder of how it just takes the pressure off, how it's a good way to approach life in general, and how you can learn from even the smallest of experiments.
Awesome.
What about you?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was helpful to see what some of like other people's destinations of choice would like what the criteria were. To just to think about like, okay, the culture of the area is important, the activities, the weather, the proximity to community, right? And just to really think about what some of those things were. And definitely feel like based on what people shared that I feel like it confirmed some of the things that we're doing. So
Yeah.
So I appreciate all of you for that. So I think we're going to wrap up here, but wanted to say thank you to everybody who joined us today. And thank you for submitting your questions and sharing with us all of your ideas. And we will see you soon.
And did you want to provide them with a
Oh,
special
yeah.
offer?
Yes. Okay. So before we wrap up, we do have a special thank you to everybody who joined this conversation live today. So one exciting thing is that we are actually hosting our annual Slow-Fi retreat in New Hampshire this year. So in our destination of choice. When we decided on this location for the retreat, we had absolutely no idea that we were moving to New Hampshire. We simply asked ourselves, where do we want to be next fall? And New Hampshire was the answer. And it turns out that is not just the answer for where we want to be next fall. It's where we want to be for much longer than that. So the Slow-Fi retreat is an intimate 3-day retreat where you have the opportunity to connect with us and 40 other like-minded people who are interested in Slow-Fi and lifestyle design. And over this 3-day retreat, we'll explore different lifestyle options, gain clarity about what's needed, and really just relax and have a bunch of fun. And a really beautiful, like mountainous lakeside retreat location. And for anybody who joined the call live today, we actually want to provide you with a special discount code to join us at the retreat. And Corey actually just dropped the link to the retreat as well as that discount code into the comments. And if you sign up for that retreat, if you want to join us, and if you sign up by next Tuesday, so March 19th, you'll actually get $200 off your ticket if you use that code that Corey just put into the chat.
And we only have a few spots left. I think there are 4 tickets available.
Yeah, so we have 4. Yep, there's 4 spots left for that retreat. And it's happening in October 3rd through 6th. And so will be a wonderful time to be up in New Hampshire. So thank you to everybody for watching and enjoy the journey.